In this episode, I am going to be reviewing Edge of the City from 1957, which was directed by Martin Ritt, and it starred Sidney Poitier, John Cassavetes, Jack Warden, and Ruby Dee. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories are told on film. Today I'm going to be discussing Edge of the City. Yesterday, Sidney Poitier passed away. Such a legendary actor. People tributes pouring in. He did so many great things, and he led the path for so many to come after him. And he gave so many wonderful performances. When you think of Sidney Poitier, people think of Lilies of the Field, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night, No Way Out, The Defiant Ones. But a film that I immediately thought of yesterday is one of my favorites with him, and that's this film, Edge of the City. I'm also a major John Cassavetes fan. For anyone who's a subscriber here on my channel, I've reviewed every film that he directed, and before he was directing, he was mainly acting, and this was actually a big breakthrough film for him. And interestingly enough, in 1965, when he really began to make more and more independent films. He had already made one called Shadows, and then he worked in the studio system as a director, which didn't really work out the way he had hoped. And he looked back on his career and he felt that he had done two good things, Shadows and Edge of the City. And I like more of his his work than he did. I think he did some great things before then as well. But this is certainly one of his best. What I love so much about it is that it really explores cowardice and racism and friendship. And it's a gripping, powerful film, which is unfortunately lesser known nowadays, particularly in the films that Poitier was in. Sidney Poitier is incredible in this film as Tommy, who's a longshoreman. He's actually a leader of a crew on this dock that they work on, as well as Jack Warden being one of the other leaders of the crew, and his character is a very happy guy. He has a happy home life. He has two children. He has a wife, and he's a incredibly kind person. And Jack Warden is the complete opposite. He's such. It's really a testament to his performance as well, because he is such a vicious, racist bully, and you get the feeling that he envies Tommy as Sidney Poitier's character, because Tommy is well liked, he's funny, he's confident, and Jack Warden lives in an environment ruled by fear. And John Cassavetes' character Axel is someone who's a draft dodger. He's on the run, and he has a connection to Jack Warden's character Charlie. He was able to get a job with him because he was helping people who are all in these sorts of jams, who are running away from the law. And Cassavetes' character is deserted the army, so he's in trouble. He's trying to start a new life, and Jack Warden helps him get the job, but then immediately begins to bully him. As soon as Axel just says thank you for helping him, he says, well, you know how you thank me? By giving me an hour of your salary. And on top of that, he had to work with him. So he was pushing him around, immediately calling him stupid, and it's hostile. And his character, every time he's on screen, I hate him so much, and the energy totally changes once he's on screen, because there's this wonderful friendship that blooms between Axel and Tommy, that a real connection, and he helps him get a place. He introduces him to a woman that Axel begins to see later on, played by Kathleen Macguire, Ellen. So another really wonderful performance, and they bond, they help each other, a lot, and he teaches him a lot, and he begins to open up to Tommy. At first, Tommy wants to get to know him, and because he doesn't want to tell him that he's a deserter and things like that. He keeps that under wraps, and I think that Tommy sort of accepts that after a while, because as he tells him a bit more, you get the impression Tommy doesn't feel that it's necessary for Axel to tell him unless he really wants to tell him. But of course, later on, it gets to a point where he needs to tell Tommy what's going on, and I'll get to why that is in a moment. But it certainly explores cowardice the most, I find, in this film, because John Cassavetes' character Axel, as I said, he's deserted the army, and it begins off the top where he lands in New York. And by the way, it's a beautiful shot as he lights up a cigarette on a boat landing in New York, and you see this the city in the background. It's a really beautiful shot. But at the same time, there's a real darkness and reality to what's happening to this man who has no money, and he shows up at this dock at night looking for a job. The guy he asks is not very nice. He's looking for Charlie, and he ends up sleeping, on the street. He has no money. He has nothing. So it's scary in that sense. He has to be homeless for that night. But he calls his parents at the top, and every time you get the impression that he's called them many times in the past. He before he begins to speak, he covers the end receiver of the phone, and he's talking, but they can't hear him. And it's because he's very afraid of his father, and his father's yelling at him. What have you done? Why are you doing this to your mother? You call and you don't even say anything. And the look on Cassavetes' face is just one wrapped in fear, as his mother is being very nice, but his father's being very cold. And he sort of reacts even stronger to his father's voice. So it's, again, a testament to Cassavetes' performance, because you get a real insight into how he feels about his father and the way he reacts in that moment. And for anyone who knows about John Cassavetes, what he was like in life, he was the exact opposite of this character. He was fearless. He was incredibly confident. He was a devilish guy. And he was also someone would never back down from a fight. If a fight a confrontation would come up, and he actually was confrontational and was not afraid of confrontation. And Axel is the complete opposite. And it's, as soon as you see him, he doesn't look any different, but that devilish grin is gone. The confidence that we saw in later performances of Cassavetes, like Rosemary's Baby or Mikey and Nicky, and even just how he was in person, he was this funny, cackling, optimistic, confident guy. And Axel, his face is just full of fear. It's a real different side to him, whether that was a real side to him or not, or he was able to find it. Was really captivating, and I forget about the Cassavetes I know in other films, and the man himself, from what I've read and heard about him. Obviously we can only know so much about these people from books and documentaries and such, but you totally believe him as this guy who is totally afraid, on the run. And as the film develops, of course, you find out that his brother died in a car accident where Axel was driving the car, and that's really what drove the wedge between him and his father. His father pushed him around. You find out later that he deserted the army because he had a sergeant, again, bullying him, pushing him around. It's really about these themes of bullying, and when he's bullied, he can't face it. He runs, and he runs and runs and runs, and now he's run into a point where he's gotten really in trouble. So later on, he runs into a soldier he knows when they all go to this dance, and this is when Sidney Poitier really forces it out of him. A really great scene where he's like, "What is going on with you? There's something wrong." And he says, that's when he tells him, "I'm in trouble." He's really in trouble. The army's after him, the police are after him, and he's at a loss. And but Poitier's character is so wise. Cassavetes as Axel has this feeling that in life you have to do something and be great at something before someone loves you. And I think that's ultimately why he went into the army. He felt And I think that had to do with his father. He felt he had to prove himself and do something great that his father would perhaps admire. And then someone can love him. And Poitier just being so wise and someone who just says, "No, man, that's not," he laughs and he says that's not true. And he has this really great look at Charlie, whereas Cassavetes gets so enraged by Charlie. Tommy, as Poitier plays the character Tommy, he laughs at him, he teases him, he makes light of him, he doesn't get to him, and he even says to Axel early on in the film, "Hey man, this guy over here, he's not even a real man. He's the lowest of the low. And what am I gonna do? I'm gonna laugh at him." And I just thought that's such a great, way to look at it. It's like almost he just had an understanding that this guy is not worth it until of course he until he had to deal with him. There's a couple of confrontations, and you certainly get the impression that this guy's a racist even before, later in the film, before this fight breaks out between Jack Warden and T, or Tommy. T was his nickname, when he's killed by Jack Warden. You strongly get the impression that he's already a racist, because he's the head, Tommy is the head of a gang, and Jack Warden says, "I remember when they didn't let guys like you, or even work here." And, Tommy with a smile says, what kind of a guy am I? And he hesitates and says, "A wise guy." But what he really meant. He's, obviously pointing out to the fact that he's, black, and a black man. He's a despicable character. I mean, sometimes I forget when I'm watching it that a lot of things happen on the first day of Cassavetes' shift there. I mean, he gets pushed around by Tommy. He gets called stupid. He's alienated right away from him. And what ends up turning around is that Tommy finds a way to get him a job with working with him. And I imagine Jack Warden didn't do much about it at first because he was still getting money from Axel. But later on, because he, again, Warden is a guy who envies these people, even though he thinks he's trying to act like he hates them. But his hatred comes from a place of envy. And, at a certain point, he does try to get rid of Cassavetes, and either you work with me, and then he wants 50 cents an hour from him. And later on really tries to push Cassavetes out. And that's where the fight, Sidney Poitier trying to defend him. And it's so heartbreaking when he gets killed. I mean, every time I see it, I've seen this a number of times. I mean, this is the first time I've seen it in about 6 years. And, by the way, I have these great TCM box sets. This is a Sidney Poitier box set. Which also has Blackboard Jungle, which is great, Patch of Blue, something, I haven't seen the other one, Something of Value, I have not seen that yet, and Edge of the City, one of my favorites. But every time I see it, it grips me so much. I mean, I think it comes down to the acting is so good. Ruby Dee is another fantastic performance later on when Sidney Poitier dies and Axel shows up to say, what happened, and she throws him out. It's really because he won't tell the police what happened. I mean, to him and everybody else in the dock, because they're in an environment full of fear. It was like, you didn't see anything, or do you want to lose your job? Like, do you want to have to? I'll fight you next, or I'll kill you next. It's just run by fear, and everyone says it was a fair fight, or everyone says they didn't see anything, they were on break, and even Axel says that. "Oh, it was a fair fight." I'm like, well, how do you stab someone? How do you kill someone? A fight does not end in murder. But he deludes himself is because he doesn't want to deal with it. And this is the moment where he calls his parents. He finally talks to them. They tell him to come home. He says, okay. And he's going to run again. It's a case of, and where he runs and runs and runs. He's always trying to run from his problems because he's a coward. And I mean, I don't mean that to insult him, Axel, but he's done that way because he's bullied and he doesn't know what else to do because he's just someone who can't defend himself or had not been taught how to defend himself because having such a tough father and losing his brother at 17 and being resented from his family. So it's certainly done with the most empathy, but he's flawed in that sense, Axel. It's the other woman, Ellen, played by Kathleen Macguire, another, this romance blooms between them, and she, follows him out on the street after Ruby Dee throws him out. And, she says, what, tell me what happened. She's pleading with him. What what happened? Why couldn't you help him? Why didn't you help him? And he says, I couldn't, because they were holding him back during this fight as well. He couldn't do anything. And as the audience, I mean, this is where the feelings are so strong, because you're totally want Axel to go and help Sidney Poitier. You feel so terrible that Sidney Poitier's died and Ruby Dee is alone with these two children. You feel for these people, and I think the middle of the film works so great also because they really develop the relationship. I mean, there's these scenes where they're all having a good time in Sidney Poitier and Ruby Dee's apartment, where they go out. And I think that was essential, because I think you felt for them so much because they really spent time with the relationships. And Martin Ritt is a really underrated filmmaker. He passed away in 1990. But he was he was always someone who was, very left wing. He was very, against any kind of racism whatsoever. And here we have a black man who was in charge, had a good family life, a white man working for him, Axel, as Cassavetes, works for him. Apparently, they couldn't even show this in the South, in the States, I believe, because you had a white man working for a black man. But he didn't care. This film was very progressive to see a black man in New York in 1950s America in a position of power, and you get an understanding more about racism from the Jack Warden character, where his racism is rooted in. There's some other great supporting performances. Val Avery, he was in a lot of films at that time. You could also see him in HUD. And if anyone, knows John Cassavetes films, he was in a number of his films, Faces, Minnie and Mousekewitz, The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. He's always a wonderful, wonderful character actor. But he's got a small part in this. And, finally towards the end, he makes it rough. Axel, in order for him to finally face his fears, which is to face the bully, he unfortunately had to run from the army. His friend had to get killed. He had to basically have everything taken away from him. And that's another element I like. They didn't just make it easy for the audience or for him. I mean, he in a lot of conventional films, you see halfway through a character changes and breaks through their obstacles, but his obstacles are large and heavy and very, very difficult. But of course, you want him to break through. You're totally on his side, and he does. He goes back and he tells Jack Warden that he's gonna take him into the cops. He gets into this fight. He gets a lot of hits, and he keeps getting back up, and he ultimately wins and drags him back into the police, because he calls the detectives into the harbor. So it's a wonderful film. I mean, I've seen it a few times for sure. I think this was the most powerful viewing I had. It's extremely emotional. And just the reality in the sense of a guy on the run. He's got no money, so he has to get a job. He has to get a room to rent. And he's sleeping on the first night outside because he has nowhere to go. I sort of like that they had that day-to-day of this man's life, and how he had to start a new life in New York. And I just like that they really put you through that. It had a real gritty reality to it. Even just seeing Sidney Poitier, again, they, picking him up for work. They become friends, going to work, picking up his kids after at school. Just the day to day. Not that it's slice of life, but that was just an element of it. And it just brought in another dimension, another reality to everyone's life. Of course, within this, deep drama. So it's a wonderful film, and Poitier is fantastic in it. Again, the rapport between him and Cassavetes is so real. I know that they both auditioned for this film, and apparently, I forget it. I believe it was the agent, because they had the same agent, Cassavetes and Poitier, or it was the casting director who said, "You guys go and rehearse for like a week before we do the screen test." And obviously, they captured a real reality, and really believable as really good friends. I know that Cassavetes and Poitier really got along on this film. I don't know how close they were later, but I know that they were friends. Cassavetes believed that Poitier should play Hamlet on the stage. I'm not sure if Poitier ever did play Hamlet, but that was something that he suggested. They did do another movie after this as well, so they did work together shortly after this as well. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's not available on any streaming services. It's hard to find. Your best bet is probably to go to the TCM website and see if you can get these box set, which is pretty reasonable. There isn't any special features or anything like that. When you open it up, it's the 4 different discs of these movies on top of one another. But it's just a nice, simple box set with these. I mean, it's a beautiful design. I love the gold design with the 4 pictures on the front. These are really, really great, and I think they're pretty affordable. And you get 4 movies, and I think it's really like the price of probably 1 Blu-ray. So I highly recommend going to the TCM website to see if you can find it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Please click a like on this video and comment below and let me know what you think of this film if you've seen it before. I would love to hear what you think. Again, Sidney Poitier will always be remembered for his civil rights activities, for being a great actor, and for really breaking through in cinema at a time when, you know, African Americans were not leads in films, and he really made an impact. And of course, you know, later we see Denzel Washington and so many great actors that he inspired that came after him. So this is a tribute to you, good sir, and you've left some incredible performances for all of us to enjoy forever. So thank you so much again, everyone. I am also on Patreon. For those of you who don't know what Patreon is, it is an exclusive membership program where you pay a monthly fee, very, very low fee, in order to get bonus content that I create. It's all based on polls. So you vote on polls and you'll be very much involved in the decision making on what I do on my Patreon. I have some more personal videos on there talking about different movies that I can relate to. I have a film noir tier, a general cinephile tier, which covers all kinds of movies, an Alfred Hitchcock tier, a monthly newsletter, which is a lot of things that I'm up to during the month that's film related outside of the podcast, books, film books I recommend, and all kinds of stuff. So head to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live on YouTube. Thank you so much again, folks, and I will see you in the next episode.